I'll first call on Ruth Mitchell to speak. Dr. Ruth Mitchell is a Sydney-based neurosurgeon. Welcome, thank you. And a passionate advocate of social justice since her childhood in Peru. She says growing up amid civil war, a conflict fueled by political and economic injustice, she learned the importance of not turning away from difficult situations and the hard task of turning around structural conflict and inequality. Her work has included serving on the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, and she chairs the board of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985. Her advocacy and humanitarian work have been widely hailed and recognised with numerous awards. And we're delighted to have her with us here today rather than a pre-recorded message, which was originally going to be the case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am so pleased to be with you in person here today in Naarm on unceded sovereign Wurundjeri land. I want to pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and to Aboriginal people here with us today. Always was, always will be. I want to thank you for the really warm welcome and for the invitation to join such an absolutely gobsmacking list of speakers. I'm pinching myself, truly. And I want to say that I'm honoured, but also humbled and inspired, both by the endurance of this campaign and the work that so many of you have done, and also by Julian's strength. As a campaigner, I know how hard it is to build momentum and to get content and community up against entrenched power. As a doctor, I have some insight into how hard it must be for Julian to keep me strong. I'm going to speak to you today, both as a campaigner and as a doctor. First of all, I want to share some thoughts as a campaigner. WikiLeaks has helped many movements, including the nuclear-free movement all over the world. I want to give you some examples of the gifts that WikiLeaks has given us, the insights we've derived, the secrets that have come to light. Each piece of information was provided by a whistleblower who trusted WikiLeaks to publish so that reform and change could happen. One of my passports is Canadian, and as a Canadian, the disclosure about the Chalk River nuclear reactor was devastating. Thanks to WikiLeaks, in 2008, the Canadian public learned about the terrible safety standards and routine practices of the Canadian nuclear regulatory system, and particularly the problems with the aging Chalk River reactor, whose cooling systems were not properly modified in 2007. This information was used to agitate for change and to prevent deadly radiation exposure. The Japanese public, thanks to WikiLeaks, knew the truth about the disaster at the Monju nuclear reactor when the video of a 1995 sodium spill and fire was made public in 2008. Monju is a fast breeder reactor that used sodium as a coolant, which is pretty dangerous as sodium is highly corrosive and reacts violently with both water and air. When 700 kilograms of molten sodium leaked from the secondary cooling circuit, there was a fire. It did not result in a radiation leak, but it could have been catastrophic. The existence of the videotape was denied. Following the 2008 announcement that the reactor would reopen, the suppressed video was leaked. The Japanese public also learned that years before the Fukushima disaster, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, had warned Japan that its power plants could not withstand powerful earthquakes. Makes sense. Europeans learned in 2010 how many US nuclear weapons were stationed in NATO nuclear sharing countries, 180, in Belgium, Italy, Turkey, Germany, and the Netherlands. Thanks to policy of neither confirming nor denying, before this, they could only guess. The citizens of India learned that cash payments were made by the Congress Party to Indian members of parliament to buy their vote in favor of the 2008 India-US nuclear deal. The citizens of the United Kingdom learned in a 2015 WikiLeaks release that a UK Trident nuclear weapons submariner that there were nuclear safety problems. And the citizens of the Central African Republic learned, thanks to WikiLeaks, that Western and Chinese companies get mining rights in their country while escaping payment for any environmental consequences. French giant Areva failed to protect miners from high levels of radiation who processed soil samples with no radiation protection and neglected local employees when pulling out of a financially and politically disastrous venture in the CAR. So us campaigners on so many issues have so much to thank WikiLeaks for, and this often goes unsaid and unnoticed. In the campaign to free the world of nuclear weapons, there are days and weeks, even years, where it's really hard to see the cumulative effect of our work, all of the actions, the statements, conferences and coalitions. It's hard to keep going sometimes. It feels hopeless. And then there are days when all the efforts tip the scales, and on those days, we win, and nuclear weapon states lose. It took a lot of actions, statements, conferences, and coalitions to achieve a treaty to ban nuclear weapons, but that day came in 2017 because of all of those efforts combined. And I know that many of you in the room have also been involved in that work, and I really want to thank you. So they combined to give courage to states without nuclear weapons to stand up and say no. Every action taken mattered and was a part of that day. And I have to be honest, winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for ICAN was a pretty good day too. And on that very good day, from the embassy, Julian was one of the first people to congratulate us via Twitter to his many millions of followers, which was particularly graceful of him when you think about the fact that, of course, he'd been nominated that year as well, and every year since then. Now, we have used our Nobel, our ICAN Nobel, to teach people about a truth they'd rather forget. The horror of nuclear weapons, their history and present, is hard to look at. Much of what Julian and WikiLeaks have exposed is similarly hard to look at. War crimes and corruption, wanton environmental destruction, systemic wrongdoing. It's hard to sustain attention on such ugly stuff. And I think we're all very fatigued at looking at ugliness. So waving a shiny gold disc around with Alfred Nobel on one side, and I don't know if you've seen it, but on the other side, there's 3 naked men cavorting. I think they're having fraternity. So using that medal, we have deepened the taboo against nukes. We've named the corporations that profit from them and described the perfection of sadism they represent, sending genetic mutation and harmful radiation into future generations. This horror aspect is a real struggle for certain campaigns. And I would suggest that in the campaign to free Julian and to protect a free press has similar but unique horrors and lots of bad news. Of course, what is happening to Julian is horrifying and frightening, and it's designed to be. When we started building ICAN as a unifying framework, we were trying to refresh and rebuild a tired, disappointed, discouraged, and frustrated nuclear disarmament movement. We were particularly despondent after the 2005 NPT review conference. We had to be inclusive and encouraging, and we had to value what folks were already doing and come alongside them while inviting them into something new. It was really tricky. In our first ideas paper, we were bold about one idea, which asserted that getting serious about nuclear weapons must involve humor, hope, and horror, equally to prevent psychic numbing and to promote real action. So I'm going to share a little bit from that paper because I think there are parallels to this campaign, which I hope you will find helpful. We risk saying that the anti-nuclear movement has a chronic kind of humor deficiency, and no wonder. It's really entirely unfunny that humanity is killing the planet with militarism. What's to laugh about, right? But we proposed that humor could be part of what could carry people through the profound experience of understanding nuclear weapons as suicidal, genocidal, and ecocidal. We proposed that humor could emphasize the absurdities of the risks, the bizarre theories of the radioactive priesthood. Painting and diagnosing these as entirely treatable psychopathologies offered a means to create teachable moments that changed attitudes without being entirely devastating. This wasn't only because we needed more laughs, but because an argument is won when one side's case appears laughable. A taboo is firmly embedded when a joke can convey complex ideas and widely held assumptions about a subject. And we were similarly adamant that hope was necessary. In our case, obviously, the hope was for a better global health through a nuclear-free future. But it wasn't just hope that was airy-fairy. We had to address the perception that eliminating nuclear weapons was naive or utopian. You know what's actually naive and utopian is thinking that security can be achieved with nuclear weapons. In more recent times, we've adopted the phrase, either we get rid of nuclear weapons or they will get rid of us. But while you can soften the blow with a joke and some hope, there's actually no way to avoid the terrifying reality of nuclear weapons. And our answer was to repeatedly emphasize and consistently couple the horror with the readily available solutions and teasing the radioactive bozos, presenting the horrifying information about decisions being taken that can be changed became active and motivating. So how does this apply to the campaign to free Julian? Well, it's already shifted, and we've heard a lot about that today. Instead of the campaign being focused on the UK and called Don't Extradite Assange, it's now been focused on a global level and has the feeling of Free Assange. Good decision. The anti-nuclear movement similarly became the nuclear-free movement, and that starting point is not trivial. While we were at a very desperate moment in the campaign now, when Julian could be extradited, certainly at very short notice, and when Julian's health is so poor, we're also at a point in the campaign where the range of voices has never been broader or louder, and we just heard about that. We've never had an Australian government actively engaging or publicly calling for his release, and we've never seen such unity amongst media mastheads and media unions and free press NGOs. I don't think we've seen human rights organizations as active on this either until now. And I remember, back in the day when really Scott Ludlam was the only voice in our parliament on this issue, and we've just heard about the motley crew now coming to the party. That's really special and important. I think there's real utility in reminding people of the wins while we remind people of the danger Julian is in, the horror of his separation from his children, and how much we miss his voice. We can and will win this for Julian and for us all. I want to say a few words now with my scrub hat on as a neurosurgeon. And as a doctor, the reports I hear about Julian's health fill me with dread and a certain rising nausea. I have found that my strongest voice of advocacy is from the bedside, and I think every single day about my dwindling number of medical colleagues in Gaza. Joining in this strange way with the journalists in Gaza as people who bear witness, who tell the stories, who faithfully report the massacre. I wish to thank in particular the work of Lisa Johnson and the Doctors for Assange, who since November 2019 have been organizing doctors and psychologists in their hundreds to write letters to the UK Home Secretary and other political leaders due to their real concerns based on evidence that Julian could die in prison. The Doctors for Assange have demanded an end to the torture and medical neglect of this unsentenced, unconvicted, non-violent, arbitrarily detained journalist. From a security perspective, it is absurd that he is in a maximum security prison. From a medical perspective, it is dangerous. His isolation and understimulation are key psychological torture tactics which induce despair, disorientation, and destabilization, and indeed disintegration of basic medical functions. Of course, also Professor Nils Melzer, the former UN rapporteur on torture, has motivated many, after taking not one, but two medical professionals into Belmarsh to assess and document torture, that witness from the bedside. Professor Metzler's work has given a lot of support to medical professionals to act. The doctors wrote to the Australian government that we, as doctors, feel ethically compelled to hold governments to account on medical grounds speaks volumes about the gravity of the medical, ethical, and human rights travesties that are taking place. It is an extremely serious matter for an Australian citizen's survival to be endangered by a foreign government obstructing his human right to health. It is an even more serious matter that citizen's own government to refuse to intervene. Again, historical precedent and numerous converging lines of medical evidence. The doctors for Assange wrote in The Lancet, doesn't get much better than The Lancet, as physicians, we have a professional and ethical duty to speak out against, report, and stop torture. Silence on Mr. Assange's torture might well facilitate his death. The silence must be broken now. Julian has endured a lot of pain. He's endured a lot of pain, and I understand most recently broken ribs from coughing due to his chronic lung problem. And who can forget that literally in front of our eyes, Julian had a stroke during an appeal hearing while sitting in a video room in Belmarsh Prison. And during the height of COVID, during the extradition hearing itself, the world learned that Julian is on the autism spectrum. Since Julian has been in the public eye, social understanding and embracing of neurodiversity has really changed, and for the better. Autism is a different way of functioning, not a problem to be overcome. And the way that Julian's brain functions has innovated and invented and combined, in his case, journalism and technology, to change history and industry. Stigma hasn't disappeared, of course it hasn't, but many of the disparaging and frankly disgusting things said about Julian in 2010 are not acceptable in 2024, and that's good. I look forward to the day we welcome Julian home. Like so many of our campaigns, we yearn for the day that we're no longer needed. We can get on with something else. Julian will need to rest and heal from what he has been through. He will need nature, he will need stillness, and also connection and community. Nothing can give him back the time he has lost, but he can, with support, heal a great deal from what his body and his mind have endured. Thank you to each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart for what you are doing to make the world a better place and to bring that day forward. We need Julian, and Julian needs all of us. Let's bring him home. Let's get it done.
Thank you, Ruth, for your invaluable work and for sharing your experiences and wisdom with us here today.